Well, hello out there. I'm Dr. Adam Booker, the Associate Professor of Double Bass at Appalachian State University and also the Instructor of Double Bass at the Canon Music Camp, held here at the beautiful Appalachian State University campus every summer. And today I'm going to give to you the Summer Masterclass series, and we're going to talk about quite a few things today. A little bit about the Canon Music Camp. As you can read here, it says it's the premier comprehensive music camp in the South. It is an amazing experience, and I hope someday one of you students will consider coming here, especially to study bass with me at the Canon Music Camp. We have a full orchestra. We have a string ensemble. It's 3 weeks of intensive music, all designed to just make you a better musician. And more importantly, though, it's also just an excellent social experience. You get to meet so many like-minded musicians, and maybe at your school there might not be as many musicians as you would like to hang out with that are just driven and dedicated towards the craft and the art of making music going on in the future. Canon Music Camp is a great place to meet a lot of folks that are just like you, including the faculty here. And of course, we have world-class faculty, and everybody's we want to create a family environment that you can flourish in as a musician and prepare yourself for the next phases of your life as a musician. So a little bit about me. I am the Associate Professor of Double Bass at Appalachian State University in the Hayes School of Music. I'm originally from Texas, around Austin and San Antonio, somewhere halfway in between there is a little town called San Marcos, where I did my bachelor's and my master's degree. My bachelor's is in jazz studies, and my master's degree is in composition. And then I moved up to the University of Texas at Austin, a whole 30 miles away, to get my doctorate in jazz double bass performance. But through all of this, I had been studying with classical bass players, classical musicians, and just really honing my skills as a bass player, not just to play jazz, but I've played, well, you name it, I can tell you I probably played it. I've played, of course, jazz and classical, both sides, right? Also Baroque, a little bit of early music. I've also performed in salsa bands, rock bands, country bands, Americana bands, vaudeville, Tin Pan Alley, show bands, and I was also in the U.S. Navy for 4 years as a bass player stationed out of New Orleans, so you can imagine I got to just dive into that rich musical tradition there as well. I became a bassist at age 12, like so many bass players before me, right? They just wait till we're about close to tall enough to hold the instrument, and then here's your bass. You get to be a bass player now. And of course, I started on double bass. I didn't start on electric bass. A lot of folks start on electric bass and move to upright bass when they get to college. That's actually a fairly frequent occurrence, but I was fortunate enough that I started on double bass. I don't think I got my first electric till I was about 16 years old or so. And but of course I also play electric bass now and do all that stuff too. So funk, rock, country, western, all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up here at Appalachian State, where I'm just enjoying everything about being an instructor here. Enjoying my faculty, colleagues, and I'm really enjoying having the students around because it's just so fun to watch them grow and flourish. And if you come up here to Canon Music Camp next summer, and we can do that together too. So what are we doing here right now, though? I'm going to give you a few tips, some pro tips that have come from a long life of being a bass player, and also help you out a little bit with your NCMEA Honors Orchestra repertoire. This year, the honors repertoire is Simandl Etude number 17, the Tempo di Polacca, and there's some things in there that at first blush don't seem like they should be there, or there's just a couple of pro tips on this. I'll give you some resources on that to help you out as well. So today's goals are going to be tips on daily practice routines to prepare for the NCMEA region and honors orchestras. We're going to talk a little bit about care and maintenance checks on your instrument or voice, should that be your case, to ensure great music making experiences. Yeah, because if your instrument's not really set up well to play, are you going to have a lot of fun? In fact, I contend that a lot of bass players end up not being bass players because a lot of those earlier experiences on the double bass are on instruments that aren't really well set up. Not a knock against your teachers, because they're not bass players by and large. Most of them are not bass players. There's very few of us in the world. So they might not be aware of what a good setup is like on an instrument and how that can facilitate easier playing and a more enjoyable experience. We're going to prepare for auditions for school, county, district, and state level events. That's your NCMEA region honors orchestras. I'm going to show you some quality recordings of some of these audition materials, as well as some other tools and aids to help you out. And we're going to talk a little bit about the written interpretation markings on this year's audition selection, and I'll give you some sort of suggestions for individual interpretation. So let's start with care and maintenance of my instrument. Now you can see I have a big old bass right here. Don't worry about what make or model it is of it. Let's talk about a couple things. Anytime I get done playing, I wipe my instrument down. And why is that? If you haven't bought bass strings yet, get ready for the sticker shock. Bass strings fortunately last a good long time. However, they do go bad, they do go old. It takes a few years though. You can have a if you wipe your strings and your fingerboard down after every practice session, your strings could literally last for years, which is good because a premium set of good strings is about $300. So very simple. I have a rag. I just go whoop. Easy peasy, right? Make sure you get in between the strings and at the fingerboard get slightly under the strings because you don't want that rosin that gets built up down in there, right? Now when I'm done with that, take a different part of the rag, not the same one that you use to wipe all your finger schmutz off with, and just give the body a little wet, especially around the bridge area. See, I'm wiping around there because there's going to be a lot of rosin buildup in there. And that's going to affect the tone of the instrument in the long run, as well as ruin the varnish, right? The top needs to be free to vibrate. So the cleaner it is, the easier it is to vibrate. Plus, we just don't like dusty-looking instruments because, you know, a dusty-looking instrument looks like you didn't practice. And I know you practiced, right? Okay, talking about string height. If you've got a wallet, and this is what I'm looking for in string height. Let's take standard card, just standard credit card, right? And what I'm looking for right off the bat, as far as SEP is concerned, is can I get this card? I'm not going to show you the numbers on the other side. Can I get this card to stay by itself underneath the G at the nut? If it can do that, then the nut's not too high. A lot of tension issues here are because this part, the nut, is cut a little bit too high, so it's harder to press down all these notes that we have to play, right? And this is, in the jazz world, we call this the cash register or the rent range, right? Because we spend a lot of time down there playing all those notes. And we do that in orchestra too, and we'll do that in the tempo de polacca as well. As far as up towards the edge of the fingerboard is concerned, I'm going to re-angle my camera here a little bit. This is a matter of personal taste. Now, of course, if you have a lovely shot of, not my head, I'm Dr. Booker, the headless bass player, but if you look down here, it's not going to be too far off the fingerboard. I usually, well, if you want the numbers, it's usually 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters, 8 millimeters, and 9 millimeters underneath each string. So 6, 7, 8, and 9. And that's a good starting point. Now, you notice my bridge down here, if you can see, has adjusters on it. And that's for when things get a little humid or a little dry and I can adjust the height of the strings. The main thing that you want to pay attention to when you're dealing with string heights is, does the string have enough room to vibrate and oscillate freely? So, you hear that little right there? That's me playing a little too loud for a string that's this low. I'm not too worried about it on an open G string because, well, as you find out later, we're not going to be using that all too often. So my G's might be a little low, but I can still get a solid fundamental out of it, right? And that's important. If it's buzzing all the time, check your string height. Also, fingerboards are not straight. There's a little bit of a scoop in them, and that's to facilitate the angle of the string as you press your finger down. So I'm checking for buzzes all the way up the fingerboard, right? So a good warm-up exercise for you if you want to do your chromatic scales. No buzzes all the way up. I'm a happy camper. All right. Bridge placement. It's very easy to determine whether your bridge is in the right spot. I'm going to come down here again. Let's get low. All right. So I have an odd looking F-hole kind of situation here, but you see these little nicks here on the side of the bridge, or on the F-holes. Those aren't just for decoration. Those actually should line up with about the halfway point on the bridge foot on each side. So if your bridge is not lined up with those, so actually it's hard to tell on the side of each bridge foot, I actually put a little pencil mark about halfway through so I know to line it up that way. So sometimes bridges can be a little too far south towards the floor or too far north, and that's going to affect your setup. As far as how the bridge should be aligned, gotta go back down here again real quick. A good bridge is actually 90 degrees to the body from here. So you can get like a book or something and check that and see if it's not leaning too far this way or too far that way. Now, bridges can warp over time, and that usually happens with too much tuning and not enough graphite in between the strings and the bridge. And what that does is it actually pulls the bridge and bends it this way. That can be repaired, but honestly, it's better to have that replaced. I mean, by a lot, it's better to have it replaced. So take care that your bridge isn't warping, and usually it'll warp towards the fingerboard. That's going to affect your whole setup, make you a less than happy camper. The other thing to think about is the placement of the sound post. Now, you need a special tool to move and remove the sound post and to place the sound post. That's when it's time to take it to a qualified luthier. Luckily, we're here in North Carolina. We have probably one of the best bass shops on the East Coast, actually, over in Greensboro, the bass violin shop. They specialize in double basses. This is not a plug for them. They're just really that good. But any qualified luthier should be able to place the sound post correctly. Usually speaking, generally speaking, it's about, if you're looking into the G side F hole, it's usually about an inch just south of the G side foot. That's a good starting place to see if it's in the right spot. If your bridge is if your sound post is right underneath the bridge, that's not allowing the top to vibrate freely and probably giving you a really bad sound, as well as taking all the pressure of all these strings and pushing it on a stick that's really just on the other side of this bass. There's not much happening there, right? So, I mean, I guess over time, potentially, it could cause cracks. It could cause a crack in the back. A poorly fitted sound post will start causing cracks on the top as well. So make sure that if you see any cracks on your top, or if you see the top sagging at all, that's when the bridge is starting to sink into, and you'll know when you see it, like the whole belly of the bass is just kind of going concave on you. That's going to affect your setup. That's a very expensive repair. So I'm a firm believer in an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So these are things that I check on my bass fairly frequently. Like, in fact, I just had to adjust my bridge this morning because it was in the wrong spot. Sometimes these things get knocked around, even when they're in cases. It can move. Might not be broken. You might not even notice it for days on end. But do frequently check on these things to make sure that nothing major is going on. And then should something major occur, take it to a qualified luthier. I'm sure your dad or your granddad are probably really great cabinet makers and have a lot of like seriously strong Gorilla Glue lying around. Don't ever put any of that anywhere on your instrument. Take it to a qualified luthier. There's a whole Facebook page dedicated to moms, dads, and granddads fixing up people's instruments, and it's hilarious as much as it is sad, and I don't want to see any of your instruments on there, okay? Practicing. Everybody loves practicing, right? Oh God, I have to practice. How about this? Let's go ahead. Let's just talk about mindset when it comes to practicing right off the bat. We have a couple. I mean, there's a lot of cliches surrounding practicing. A couple of my favorites are as follows. If you're bored in a practice room, you're doing it wrong. If you're performing in a practice room, then you're performing and you're not practicing. If you sound good in a practice room, then you're not practicing. So with those three things in mind, there's always something else to practice, and there's always something else to hone and just sharpen and make better every time. And if, like I said, if you're bored in a practice room, make exercises out of the music. You know. So for example, one of the things that I like to do, let's take this tempo to polacca real quick. Let's just take the opening phrase. All right, fair enough. That's the opening statement. Oh, but I'm also practicing a scale. I like that last fingering the most. Okay, well, I got the fingering down. Let's talk about the tone. Do I like the sound of it? It says forte. Now remember, gang, forte means strong. It doesn't mean loud. It just means strong. You could spend a lot of time trying to find the right sound for that low E. I like that stroke. Let's speed it up. And so on and so forth. So listen for the little things while you're practicing. Don't get bored in the practice room. Make a weekly schedule. Now, I have my studio doing this one of two ways. My studio is required to keep a weekly practice log, and I allow both ways. But the way I do it is I don't practice what I have already done, or I don't log what I've already done, I should say. What I do is I sit down on Sunday night and I log what I'm going to do throughout the week. There's an old adage that if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Rather than look back and say, I practiced this, oh wait, I forgot to practice that one thing. I sit down at the beginning of the week and say, by Friday, I'm going to have all of this stuff practiced, and then I break it down. Monday, I'm going to do this. Tuesday, I'm going to do this. Wednesday, I'm going to do this, and so on and so forth. I'll put things like I'm going to have measures 1 through 7 up to tempo, or measures 7 through 9 at half tempo, or even if it's just one measure, just so by the end of one particular day. And if you're going to go this route with it, I highly recommend it, just making a plan for the week to practice. That also commits you to a course of action through the future, right? Rather than like, okay, what did I practice 2 weeks ago? What did I practice last week? I don't remember what I practiced on Tuesday. And not writing it down in time. Everything is already ready to go. I know exactly what I'm going to work on every given day. And then I could just boop, check that off, boop, check that off, boop, check that off, not a problem. And I set the time I'm going to practice in this practice log, in this forward-looking practice log. I set the time and I make it sacred, okay? We all have things that we have to do throughout the day. I have to teach. I have to, drop my kids off at school. I have to make sure I'm home when they get home, all that kind of stuff. So we have schedules. If we don't make practice time a sacred part of our time of the day, then everything else can very easily get in the way of it. And the more you practice, the better you get. It's just that simple. So think about that when you're trying to plan for practicing. Also, remember that little things become big things, right? If I'm sitting here and I'm struggling with this, you hear the little things in there that I'm not playing just right. That just one little shift is worthy of my attention. It's worthy of my time to get it just so. It's a little thing, but this little shift isn't just something I'm going to see in the Samandal etude. It's something that I'm going to see in a lot of other repertoires. So it's definitely worthy of my time to spend some time just getting that just so, right? This little, I pointed out earlier, this becomes an E minor scale. And from 1 to 5, right? How many times in your life are you going to play that particular scale? A lot, right? And then you can practice it in other ways. And so on and so forth. It's just, again, never get bored in a practice room again. There's always something you can work on. And if it's a little thing, then that little thing is very important. Practicing during the school year. I'm going to tell you that this affects me as a teacher just as much as it affects you as a student, finding time to practice. And I will say that 30 minutes a day is better than 8 hours once a week. There is no cramming for this. This is about pure muscle memory in a lot of ways. Repetition is the mother of all learning. That's what my first big bass teacher taught me. It's if you practice for 30 minutes every day, then you're reinforcing the hand and mind connection and the body and mind connection of playing, and it just becomes that much easier. If you're trying to force 8 hours once a week, then you're not really reinforcing anything. In fact, you're just cramming all this information, and your short-term memory is just not going to be able to retain everything. However, your short-term memory for 30 minutes is going to retain a lot more information. In fact, when I set my practice schedule, I usually set it up in 30 to 60-minute chunks throughout the day. The great John Clayton, a good friend of mine and a great double bassist, once said, practice all day, a little bit at a time. And that's kind of been one of my mantras. If you can practice 30 minutes and only practice like 2 or 3 things in that 30 minutes, remember the average human time span is only about 7 to 10 minutes, right? So if you're practicing for 8 hours, your time you've already lost it. You checked out 7 hours and 53 minutes ago. Right, but if you practice 30 minutes and you only keep to like 1 7-minute chunk for one thing, and then move on to another thing for 7 minutes, and move on to another thing for 7 minutes, with like little 3 minutes just to drink some water or something like that, or stretch in between, then you're going to retain that information more over time. If I can wax philosophical for a second, one of the things I tell my students here at App is that a river will not move a mountain, but a stream will carve a canyon, right? So think about that, chew on that in your brain for a little while. Another tip, big pro tip, keep your bass out of its case. If you happen to be fortunate enough to have a bass at home, the minute you get home, if you're carrying it between school and home, take it out of the case. Leave it out. If an instrument in a case is easily ignored, an instrument out of a case is, oh, look at my bass, I should play that right now. Sweet. And next thing you know, you're playing. You might not be practicing yet, but it's definitely easier to get over that hump. And let's face it, these things aren't easy to lug around, and they're definitely, they're a little bit more physically involved to get it out of, because it's like you're wrestling your friend over here. If I could get out of the case, and it takes a little bit of effort to actually get this thing out of the case. So, I transport this bass between my house and my office all the time. And the minute I get home, I take it out of the case. The minute I get to my office, I take it out of the case. Cases are for transport only. And again, I cannot stress this enough. Set a time to practice every day and make it a sacred time for you to practice. So, preparing for an audition in advance, practice slow. And what I mean by practice slow, and this is like, let's say this audition is probably going to be sometime in January or something like that, We have a lot of time. And there's only about 80 measures in the tempo de polacca, okay? 80 measures, let's break that down over the term of 1 week, okay? This is where math comes in. 80 measures over 1 week is how many measures a day? That's 7+ measures a day, easily, in terms of 1 week. And you can practice those measures for a 30-minute chunk. I'm not going to do it here because that'll make for a very long and boring video. But I will say this. I happen to have it right here. And I'm going to set my metronome at 60 BPM. Good old 60. You might be thinking, oh, is that the quarter note, Dr. Booker? Nope. That's going to be the 8th note. So it's going to end up sounding like this. And so on and so forth. And if that's too fast, if you can't play it all the way through at that speed, then slow it down. You know why? Because there's no shame in slowing things down. There's no shame in slowing things down in your practice room to a point where you can play through it. Now it says practice the entire piece. This is a good thing to get used to. And this is something that a lot of musicians struggle with when they're learning a piece of music. Now, when I learn a piece of music, I'm going to learn it in chunks. I'm going to learn it 1 measure at a time, 2 measures at a time, 4 measures at a time, 8 measures at a time. It's all base 2 math, right? I'm going to learn it in chunks like that. But when I get closer to an audition, I'm going to practice playing through the whole piece quite a bit. And not only that, but playing through any mistakes you made. Now, I'd like to say I could play through this perfectly cold, with maybe just a modicum of practice. I don't think that's the truth, though. There will be mistakes because I can hear the mistakes that can be made. However, if I'm in an audition situation, there's no time to go like, oh, hold up a second. Nope. You just have to play through that and, practice more for the next time, right? So. And so on and so forth. I'll just play through the whole piece. Now, if I can't play through the whole piece at tempo, which in this case is quarter note at 88, if I can't play through the whole piece at tempo, I'm going to practice it playing through the whole piece well under tempo and get all the way through it with as few mistakes as possible. And here's another tip for that. When you're practicing your way through the whole piece, keep playing through all the mistakes, but set up some kind of audio or video recording device when you do that. And that way, you don't have to think about those mistakes and how to fix them while you're trying to perform. So we've got to flip our brain switch a little bit, right? There's a difference between practicing and performing, right? If we're practicing, we're fixing things. If we're performing, we're performing. There is no fixing things at this point. You're done. You did all your practice. Roll your dice, and that's what you're going to get. So when you video or audio record yourself performing through this whole piece, it could be an iPhone, it can be a, webcam, something, your computer, whatever. Doesn't matter. As long as you can sit back and watch that after you're done performing with the music next to you and just circle the parts that really need some attention. That way, when you set your practice schedule for the next week, you can really hone in on those points, right? If I played through the whole piece perfectly and only messed up like maybe one measure, I know that's a contradiction, but if I played through except for two measures perfectly, then why would I want to practice those measures that I already know how to play when I can hone in on my time and just play those two measures, right? Now, again, practicing the piece in small chunks is kind of important too. And I mentioned that that's usually what I will do first. And ways to do that, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. You could do it one measure at a time, you know. In a piece like this, I would tend to go to the downbeat, right? And then I take a break and I'd assess. But don't keep going and then trying to assess what you just played, right? So here's me trying to assess what I just played. Okay, so I think my F sharp was a little sharp, right? So you see how the second I started thinking about that prior location, everything started falling apart. No, because we have to be in the moment of the music, right? Now, once we can play through this piece as much as we can perfectly, I'm going to gradually increase the tempo. I'm a big fan of +10 -5 technique. +10 means whatever you play it at, you do it 10 clicks faster, and then you drop it back. You do it again 5 clicks slower than that last one. Let me demonstrate. I'm just going to play the first two measures to the downbeat of measure 3 of this. And that's, we'll call this quarter note at 60. All right, that's at 60 +10. All right, and now we go -5. So what you might have noticed is that really doesn't sound that different, does it? I went 10 clicks faster the second time, and then I dropped it back 5 clicks. And then what I'll do next is I'll go up to 75. Okay, and then I'm going to go back down to 70. And why not? Let's go up to 80. In case you didn't notice, we're getting really close to the actual performance tempo of this piece, which is only 88, right? And then I'd drop it back to 75, and then I'd go up to 85. Now here's another hint though, and it's not listed on this on this PowerPoint, is once you get comfortable playing it at 88 or whatever tempo, well, here's a couple of other pro tips. One, 85 will be probably just fine for your audition. It's generally expected that in an audition, what we'd be listening for is your accuracy, rhythmic accuracy, and intonation, right? And if you can't quite get it at 88, but you can nail it at 85, it's not a huge difference, but sometimes those couple of beats per minute can make or break a musician. Then it's perfectly fine to be just a hair under tempo. But think about this. You'll be in an audition. Some of you might not have ever auditioned before, and you might get nervous. And what happens when you get nervous? Your heart rate starts going, your mouth gets real dry, you get tunnel vision, you're set up to survive, right? That's what nerves are. It's back here in the back of your brain, it's your old lizard brain saying, oh my gosh, there's a lion, it's going to eat me. It's the same part of your brain that does that gets you nervous, right? It's fight or flight or freeze syndrome. And one of the things that can happen is that your fine motor skills break down, and they prefer like bigger motor skills. So next thing you know, you're just like sawing away. You're going way faster than is comfortable. So what I tend to recommend is that not only practice it up to the tempo, but practice it 10 clicks beyond that tempo, because you need to know how you would be able to react should your body senses just start making you speed up and rush and still maintain that rhythmic and intonation accuracy. So I've always been kind of an advocate of practicing 10 clicks plus. Don't get used to playing there, because then you'll be rushing in your audition. You bring it back down. But just understand what that's going to feel like should that happen to you. Of course, use a tuner and a metronome. Use a tuner and a metronome. Use a tuner and a metronome. I can't say this enough. Use a tuner and a metronome. Now, let me do this real quick. I'm going to go hop on YouTube real quick on my iPad here, and I'm going to set a drone at E natural, E cello drone. You can just type in E cello drone, and it'll get you what you want. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and practice with that drone going, nice and slow. See, I'm listening for those notes to be in tune. And what notes are you notice I'm honing in on? The root, which is the E. I'm honing in on the B when I get there, just making sure that that shift was just so. I even honed in on the A a little bit just to make sure that that was in tune. Now, another trick to this is not just practicing on the actual root of the piece, but practicing on the fifth. So in this case, that would be a B. This could sound kind of funky, but why not? Let's give it a shot. And so on and so forth. So practicing with drones is a great idea on this instrument. Why? Because we got to shift all over the place, and knowing what it sounds like when you shift from an in tune note to another in tune note, that's half the battle, really. Another pro tip: number your measures so that you know exactly which measure you're working on at any given time. And as I go through this piece slowly, I'm going to talk to you about measure numbers and things like that. Of course, I've got mine on an iPad in PDF format. Wicked cool. It's 2021. Thought I'd go and splurge a little, but it has made my life a lot easier. If you have this on paper somewhere, just get a pencil handy. Always have a pencil handy. But real quick, before I get into the piece itself, let's talk about the day of the audition. Okay, what do you do the day of the audition? Well, the audition for you starts the night before. Get a good night's sleep. Don't stress about the audition because it hasn't happened yet. Eat a good meal that night before you go to bed. Eat a good meal that morning when you wake up. Play through the piece very slowly in the morning. Get a solid warm-up in. Don't overdo it, though. You don't want to be tired by the time you go into the audition. You just want to be ready. You want to feel like, okay, I've practiced this slow. If you make mistakes while you're practicing the piece on the day of the audition or playing through it, don't sweat it. It's just going to happen. Understand that you might just make mistakes. And, once I personally realized that, I might just make a mistake from time to time. Once I realized that I was a human being and you're a human being too, it's okay. It's okay. Just don't lose your cool when you make a mistake. Don't stop in the middle of the audition. Don't freak out if you're warming up through the piece before the audition, like, I made that mistake, and then you'll be thinking about it once you get into the audition. Just don't worry about it. I can't preach that enough. You could fix it the next time. You could fix it on the next piece. You can fix it tomorrow. You can fix it where you can't fix it is in the audition itself. So like I said, if you've properly prepared yourself through the whole process, setting a practice schedule, keeping to it, making it sacred, planning your practice sessions in advance, not afterwards, not keeping a log, but keeping a plan. Practicing it in chunks to get it just so, practicing it slowly, doing the +10 -5 technique with the metronome, that kind of thing, practicing with drones for intonation, practicing with a tuner for intonation. There's so many things you can do to prepare for this, and you have so much time to do it. Now, how to practice sight reading is a whole other animal, because by virtue of the name, sight reading means that you've never seen this music before. I can tell you, one of the things that I notice most about sight reading is that it's not a matter of knowing where the notes are. It's more of a matter of knowing what the rhythms are. So you can actually practice sight reading by pulling out fresh music on a daily basis and really just honing in on the rhythm, counting and clapping that rhythm. Including it in your daily routine will make you a better sight reader. I'm not kidding. It's usually rhythms that's going to trip you up. And start basic. Start really basic. Get a method book that you've never tried before. Like, you know, if you're using the Simandl method to learn how to play the bass, get the George Vance Rabath method and start working through that slowly. Get the belay method and start working through those etudes slowly. Get the Zimmerman orchestral excerpts and start working through those slowly. But the key is to practice it at what we like to call tempo di lerno. In other words, when you're sight reading, you only get to look at it for like a good 30 seconds or so, but make sure that you set a metronome slow enough that you can play through it. And that's only going to enhance your skill as time goes on. Now let's talk about a little bit more in depth on the tempo di polacca. That's the high school solo. It's etude number 17 from Simandl's 30 etudes. Now the key to this etude, and I've talked with a number of colleagues about this, and the general consensus is to not use the open G. And let me explain this why. This is in the very first measure of this piece. So that's not using the open G and going straight up the D string. We call this it's a vertical concept, right? I'm just going to open 1, 2, 4. There's a couple of reasons why I do that, and actually pretty darn decent musical reasons, but I'll explain that in a minute. Did you hear the difference? This is the way I like to play it. Versus the main reason why we don't use the open G on this etude is because you have this F sharp against that G. Now, and that's kind of a cool sound, but I don't think that's what Franz Simandl was thinking back in the 1890s when he wrote this etude. I think he was thinking more along the lines of kind of a hybrid between my vertical concept, going up the E string or the D string like that to get to the B, versus that's another way to do it. Either way, I'm playing 2 and 4 for the F sharp to the G. Now the reason why I go up the D string for it is, if you noticed, here's me going up the G for it. Versus it's a little bit darker of a sound, plus it's minus 1 string crossing, plus it just kind of maintains the tone all the way through the phrase, right? So versus and so on and so forth. Watch the 2 down bows at the beginning, right? And you can spend some time just going. And so on and so forth. And it happens again here. And so on and so forth, right? Now, what happens starting in measure 5, you could do this one of 2 ways, and I've seen it perfectly acceptable to do both. It's down, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Or perfectly acceptable to do it this way as well. And there's an argument to be made for either way. Because it's notated down, then it's perfectly arguable to be able to go. And I'm intentionally playing those quarter notes short, just to give it a little bit more space in between, so it sounds a little bit more aggressive, right? Again, I'll leave that up to you, whichever way you want to do it. Here it is. Here's a measure 5 with down, down, up. And here's measure 5 bowed as it comes. And so on and so forth. Okay. So that's the difference between going, the main takeaway here is just don't play that open G. Just don't do it. Don't play that open G until you get to measure 17. Then you kind of really don't have much of a choice, and it sounds just fine. Right? Because, I mean, if I were to try... that just gets a little wacky, right? So it's perfectly fine to go. Now, big hop right here, right? So I went from 4, 2, 4, 1. Big hop. Now, see how I made that hop, though? My thumb didn't come around, and I kept contact with the strings. Watch. I'll play it again really slowly. Here's the shift. See, I shifted with my first finger up to here. And so on and so forth, right? Now this is a harmonic up here, that high G. You've got to come back to 4 for that D. And you can come up the D string here. So when I'm coming down the D like that, 4, 4, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 4. You can stay on the G here at this point. 4, 4, 1, 4 for the G, 1, open. You have to come up to this D. And the sequence repeats again. Okay, going into the cantabile, you've got a little bit of a retardando, right? So let me start at measure, let's start at measure 29. Just a little bit of a slowdown. Don't go too crazy. Now, there's a big shift in how things happen here. It's slower, it's cantabile. That means now really slow, right? And it's piano dolce. So whereas we had this whole first half of the piece as being forte, which is strong, piano dolce is a little quieter, a little sweeter. And I'm not going to play an open G, right? Say it with me. I'm not going to play an open G. That's a slick move, but that's actually what's written here. So I'm coming in at measure 39. So actually, let me start at measure 39, 38, 37. Measure 37. Hit the harmonic. 4, 2. I differ a little bit in what Samandel does. I carry cross for this C on the D string. 2, 1, 3, and then replace on the G. So it's a D on a G string here. 1, that's measure 40, 41, 42, 43. Measure 43, and it happens again later. So if I start at first finger A on the D string, that's where that tuning harmonic is, right? 1, 2, stretch out with my third finger to hit the harmonic, and then collapse back to C. First finger back on A, puts my third finger right over that E, right? Rather than going, that's a whole lot of shifting when I could just go, right? So I guess one of the big takeaways here, gang, is get used to playing on the D string a lot, because it's actually quite a useful string. Continuing. See, still on that D string. All that stuff on the D string is just so handy, right? Plus, it, like I said, it darkens the sound a little bit. It's not as bright, and that really plays into the concept of being piano dolce through this piece, right? Let's see, where am I? We're going to start at measure 49. So, D, first finger, open G, now be very careful with that spot right there. It looks like a grace note, right? But it's actually not. Stylistically, you want to treat that as 2/8 notes rather than a grace note and a quarter note. So it's not that. It's 2, 3, and 1, 2, off. So be very careful with all these hairpins. See how much my bow is moving? I'm just moving this sucker just to get louder and softer and louder and softer and louder and softer, right? And then we're right back where we started. Tempo di polacca. And so on and so on and so on, right? So you can rewind this if you need to go back to this. It's the same tips from the last time. Now, there's a couple of really handy things to look at here. Let's see, we listed some important things to do, look for, remember when performing this selection. Let me list those out again, okay? Learn to get comfy with the D string. The D string is your friend. And what I would do is I practice this E minor scale. But I practice it from this open D, right? And that gets you your whole range of the D string that you're going to be using on this piece. And then you have, so then I'd also practice G major on top of that. And then G major but with a flatted 7th, which makes it G Mixolydian for all you theory buffs out there. Because you'll encounter those notes. And just practice those in and out of time, right? But the other thing to not do is just, we're not going to play that open G right there. Because that G and that F sharp will still be existing in the same space. That's the big kicker on this piece. And let's see. If you were to, I have put a couple links in here. Dr. Mark Morton, he's the professor of double bass at Texas Tech University, a good friend of mine, has a really excellent piece that lays a lot of good information out on you. And also, if you're interested in really honing your skills and being able to play this in time and understanding that this isn't a solo piece, this is actually an intermediate, beginner, intermediate level concert piece written by Franz Mendel for his students, there's piano accompaniment available. You can find that on IMSLP if you want the sheet music, or you can follow this link to the MIDI accompaniment. And the cool thing about that is on YouTube, you can actually slow things down by like 25% at a time. So that's kind of helpful as well, just to learn to practice it with the MIDI accompaniment. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. keep a lookout in the future. I'm going to post a couple of videos of me playing through this in its entirety, if that's helpful for you. It's been my pleasure to speak to you today about my beloved instrument and how I approach it. And I hope to see you soon. I hope to see you at Canon Music Camp this summer, this coming up summer 2022, because it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a resurgence. I think it's just going to be a very beautiful, vibrant, and exciting time. So I hope you have a wonderful time and happy learning. Of course, if you want to get in contact with me, there's my email, bookeras1@appstate.edu. I'm happy to answer any questions. And with that being said, I wish you a good afternoon or evening or morning or whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so very much.